halacha, which is the whole idea of shlichus, giving up one's ruchnius for oneself for the ruchnius of another yid. And that's the word that noyach loyla adam shaloi nivra. If I was created for me, then my whole life I'm worried about me. It's a selfish pursuit. Even a ruchnius dika, selfish pursuit. I got to do this to get my Gan Eden, to get my Olam Haba. Right? It's Pashat, it's Gefarla. Noyach loyla adam shaloi nivra is Pashat, make living a life it's a God-centric life. That's the whole Nukud of Yiddishkeit. And therefore, it's normal that a Yid will do something for another Yid, which is beneficial for the other, even if it would not be the ideal for the doer himself, because we are not here for ourselves. Vaited, the whole idea of bittul. Then we're going to start with the Mishnah Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to learn in this Mishnah many details about the koira. We're going to learn about different unusual types of koiros. We're going to have a concept called royan, the principle of we view as if, which is something that halacha allows us to do in certain circumstances. We're going to review the machlokes regarding what is lavud. I mean, lavud is halacha l'Moshe Messinai, but the question is lavud applied to some things that are within 3 tvachim, or we have the other Tana, that Ashbag, that says lavud is applied only to items, or even applied to items that are within less than 4 tvachim. We're going to have a source in the Gemara that halachically we are allowed to approximate the 3-to-1 ratio, the concept of pi, that when you have a circumference, the circumference of a circle to a diameter, halachically, we say it's 3-to-1. The emes is, you can measure and know. The pi, the real pi is 3.14 and something to 1. But halacha allows us to approximate. We're going to have the source from that. We're going to learn a little bit about the Yam, Sha'asa Shloimah, the beautiful outdoor mikvah that Shlomo HaMelech built in the Chatzir, in the Azara of the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to learn about its dimensions. The Gemara is going to tell us that held enough water to make 500 mikvahs, every mikvah needing the amount of 40 sa'ah. We're going to learn the rule of Gutsha Tilsa. If you have a container, if that container has in it liquids, that means it only goes until the top. If you now put in it solids and you are able to heap it, that's called a goydish. So then you are able to add an entire third. That's how much more the heap is able to contain. And on Daf Yudalad Amud Beis, we're going to have a Mishnah that's going to give us many details about the lechi. We're going to have the sheet of the Tanach Rabbi Yossi that a lechi must have a minimum width, and we'll see that is of 3 tfachim. We're going to learn the klal that we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, mamish the opposite of what we learned on Daf Yud Gimel, that we normally do not paskin like Rav Meir. But as a klal, it's called Rabbi Yossi Nemukai Imai. And finally, we're going to learn a very important principle that's applied sometimes, that when we don't know who the halach is like, Chazal say, Puk chazi ma amodabar. Go see what people are doing. When you look at the Faruma community and they're doing X, Y, or Z, that sometimes is the siman. That's the way we paskin. Okay, let's start. Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis by the Mishnah. Right, that's the end of the medium size, the end of the last medium size line. Hakodesh Amru.
Amen.
Says the Mishnah. Hakodesh Amru. What are the dimensions of this crossbar that are one of the options to be Matir Rabbi? Says the Mishnah, there is a minimum width that it must have. And what is that width? It has to be wide enough to be able to hold a oriach. Oriach is a name of a brick. Oriach is actually a half of a levena. We're going to learn a lot about these bricks when it comes to the beginning of Bava Basra. When we learn about the fence that two neighbors have to both participate in building because of the concept of hezik re'iyah, as we'll learn over there. So Ariach is called a half a brick. The Mishnah says Ariach is a half a levena. A levena has a width of 3 tvachim, which means a Ariach has a width of a tefach and a half. So the koira has to be wide enough to have on top of it an Ariach. So when you learn the Mishnah, what would you think? Well, if an Ariach has a tefach and a half, the Mishnah seems to be saying that the koira must have the width of a tefach and a half. Says the Mishnah, no. That daya l'koira sheteheidu chav a tefach, the koira can only be a tefach. Having a tefach width is enough, or as we have here in the Messiah Sashas, la'orkoi. And actually, the Gemara is going to ask, hold on, even if you align it, it's not mamish aligned, right? Because you're going to have a quarter of a tefach protruding on each side. Indeed, the Gemara is going to speak about that on top of the Amud. Another din, rechava, not only does it have to be wide enough, which means the koira has to be one tefach wide, but the Tanach holds, it has to be strong enough. In other words, Yutaka must be able to pile on top of this koira a ganze building, right? Bricks. Rabbi Yehuda says, according to our Girsa, yes, Tanakama, I agree that the koira has to be rechava. It has to be wide. I'm just adding these words. It has to be a tefach wide. However, but it doesn't have to be strong enough to actually support these bricks on top of it. In other words, it only has to have the semblance. It has to appear like, oh, you can build something on top of it. In other words, even if even if the koira is made out of materials that's weak, strong, or reeds, nevertheless, as long as it has a tefach width, royin oisa. My friends, that's the klal of royin. We view it as if that it's made out of metal, it's made out of a material that's strong, and it's able to support the oriyach, a row of bricks called a oriyach. But again, it does have to have l'kula alma, the minimum width of a tefach. Now says the Mishnah, what happens if it is akuma? Akuma means that the koira is bent. In the area where it bends, you physically cannot put a oriyach because of its bent position. Weiter, we say royin. Royin oisa ke'ilu pshuta. We view it as if it is straight. We're going to have more details about this with pictures when we learn the Gemara. Next in the Mishnah, what happens if the oriyach is not the way you are imagining a 2x4? It's round. What's wrong by the fact that it's round? I'll tell you why. If you want to be able to put on top of it a row of oriyach bricks, so if the base is rounded and a brick is flat, it's going to roll off. So again, it doesn't bother me that it's round. All you need to do is royin. What does royin means? Royin oisuki ilohi merubas. Look at it, view it as if merubas doesn't mean square. It means square, but it means that it's planed down in order for it to be flat. So if you have a circle, royin oisoi that it's flat, but hold on, the koida l'kol alma has to have the minimum width of a tefach. How do you determine whether something rounded, if you were to view it not at its circumference, but at its diameter, and make believe the diameter is flat? What is the formula, what we call here in English, of pi? Says the Mishnah, as long as if you were to put a string around this rounded koida, and you would see that the measurement of the circumference is 3 tefachim. That's the minimum that you need, because when you have the circumference of 3, then yesh bayroichav tefach, then you know that the diameter is a tefach, and I don't care that the gashmi it's round because of the principle of royin. Now, when people hear this, it sounds more or less okay, but there's a big chiddush involved over here. And why is that? This they always knew. You know, measure a circumference, and you will see that it's not 3-to-1. It's not 3-to-1. It's 3.14 something to 1. So I get it. The Mishnah sometimes, we have this other times in Shas, as we have in Tanach, as we have in Chazal, there are times that we round things off. But over here, we're being machadish that we are allowed to approximate, even though when it comes to the width of a tefach, you can't approximate. If you have a koira that's a tefach minus a millimeter, it's not a kosher koira. It doesn't have the width of a tefach. It has to be a tefach. Here we're saying that if it has 3 circumference will not give you a tefach, because pi is 3.14 to 1. Elama, we're going to learn in the Gemara source that when it comes to making this cheshbon of pi, we are allowed to approximate. So therefore, we apply the rule of Royin even when it's only 3 tefachim. Daf Yudal is on the top. First kasha is, the Mishnah spoke about, it has to be a tefach, right? And we had the oriach. The oriach, as we mentioned, is a tefach and a half. And it's supposed to kedei lekabel oriach. So frek the Gemara, tefach, how is tefach enough? Tefach umechzabaya, you should need a tefach and a half. Answers the Gemara, kiv and the rachav lekabel tefach. Since it can hold on it almost, right, the entire brick. Elama, the brick itself is a tefach and a half. If you align it in a symmetrical way, you'll have only a quarter of a tefach protruding in each side. Ida chatzi tefach milabin lebetinam. You normally, when you build a row of bricks on top of a crossbar, you would connect the bricks by putting cement under the brick. The cement also takes up space. So mashu ma'agisa or mashu ma'agisa, the cement itself goes out a little bit. So yeah, if you're going to build a row of bricks known as a ariyah on top of a koida, the koida doesn't have to be more than a tefach, because and on top of the koida you're adding cement. Cement takes up space. And how much space? This little amount. So a little bit on the quarter over here and a quarter over there. Now the brick will be laying fully on top of the koida. Now, a couple of dinim. Amar Rabban Barafuna. Koira Sha'amru. Sricha Shetehibria. Kedei lekabel oriach, as is Shitas Tanakama. Right? It's not only about the width, but the Tanakama holds it's also about the strength. And now, sometimes the koira is placed on top of the walls, right? But sometimes, which is much like we have in this picture, it's on top of the walls. But sometimes, as we learned above, the koira is not long enough. And in order for you to have it on top of the walls, you have pegs, or you have other relatively more flimsy materials that are placed on top of the wall that go out a little bit over the mabui upon which you put the koira. Do those pegs also have to be strong enough lekabel oriyach? So says Rabba Barafuna, umamile koira ein tzrichim shetehibrin kedei lekabel koira v'oriyach. It's only the koira that must have the semblance, right? That wow, it's a permanent crossbar and it's strong, but you don't actually put a row of bricks. So if the koira is resting on pegs, and if you would have put on the bricks, the pegs would not be able to hold the weight. That I don't care about. The koira has to be strong, but if the koira is resting on side pegs, the pegs don't have to be that strong, because you are actually never putting on bricks. You don't need to. Rav Chizda says, no, it has to be taka strong enough. That it has to be built in a way that if you would want to put a row of oriach bricks on top of this koira, it will have the koyach to hold it up. Another thing, the person puts a koira and he became he's a fruma. He's going to add to it. He added more of a heket. What did he do? He draped on top of the koira some sort of mat, and the mat is coming down on both sides, almost all the way to the ground. Elama, it's not within 3 tvachim. But it's above the ground 3 tvachim or more. Now, when you look at that, you would say, oh, this is a super kosher mavui. It's mamish sectioned off from the street. Says Rab Sheshes, this is such a good liner. Koira inkan, mechitza inkan. You're not allowed to carry in the mavui. You thought you adding many times is subtracting. Koira inkan, because the michasiyom mechitza, it's covered by a mechitza. Let's go perhaps with the concept that the koira is here mishum hekeda. I know you can go both ways, but let's go one way. The koira you're not seeing. But hold on, but you see the mechitza, you see the reed mat. So he says mechitza inkan. The mechasya, kama mechitza inkan. The havala mechitza shagedoyim boikim ba. Yeah, there is a mechitza, But theoretically, even if the mechitza is only going down 10 tfachim, theoretically, we have the concept of good achis. But as we mentioned, not like by P tikra yored v'soisam. By P tikra, we don't care if there are animals that are going back and forth. Here, the fact that animals are able to go under the reed mat, why is that? Because it's not within 3 tfachim. There are empty, there's a gap of 3 tfachim allowing a gedi to krich back and forth. That breaks the rule of the mechitza. So not you have the heker, not you have a mechitza, you may not carry in the mother. Okay. Other details of unusual koidas. We learned in a brayso. Koidel is on top of one wall and it's coming over the mavoi, but the ein negas b'koisel zeh. But it's not going all the way to the other wall. Also, if you began not by putting down one crossbar, but you began to build a koida coming out from right to left, then you built another little koida that's coming out left to right, and you were hoping that they'll meet in the middle. I heard someone was building a bridge that way, one of the big bridges. They began on one side in Brooklyn, the other side from Manhattan, and the Chacham went to yeshiva, but he didn't go to schooling properly for stays, and the bridges in the middle did not come up, they were not aligned. He used lavud, just the car didn't learn lavud in yeshiva, so here it works. So the Gemara says, says the Baraisa, if they are only off, but it's less than 3 tvachim, doesn't matter. It's considered connected. But if it's off, if it's unaligned 3 tvachim or more, then here again, as we had above on DAF Tes, right? It's not that much repeated, but don't think that everyone subscribes to Lavud as in less than 3. Everyone holds of Lavud. But the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that no, that Lavud is Lakula. You say Lavud up until less than 4. Pachus midaladein sarach lavi koid acheres. Adabat sarach lavi koid acheres. I just want to make a very important point that when we just learned above by Rapshashis regarding the mechitza, that mechitza ain't kan because gedoyim boiken boy, lakula alma is 3 tfachim. Very important. Here we're speaking about what's going on up there in the ear. There are no gedoyim kriching around up there. So that's why there's where Rabbi Gamliel Shita, Dashbak Shita, of less than 4 is still lavud is effective. Good to remember that. When we're going to learn the sukkah, whenever you're speaking about a mechitza coming to the ground, there everyone holds up there has to be less than 3 because of the issue of gedoyim boiken boy. When we also learned above, remember there was lechis that were on the wall, and that's another machlokes, but there was less than 3 between them or less than 4 between them. That's also a machlokes because when the lechis on the wall, no gedoyim can walk through a wall. Whenever you don't have an issue of animals being able to physically walk through a halachic mechitza, that's where you have the machlokes, like we have over here. But okay, very good. The base koides hamasimais. If you have two koides that are placed on top of an entranceway, but we learned that each one has to have a minimum of a tefach. Neither of them have that amount. Right? So the din is im mikablis oriach l'rachbei tefach. One way of learning it is if you would have put both of these koidos together they measure the width of a tefach, then you're good. Ein sarach lavi koid acheres. However, the imlav, but if even when you put both koidos together, each koid is less than a half of a tefach, together you don't have a tefach. You don't approximate. There's no tefach. It's not good. Then sarach lavi koid acheres. However, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, no. Im mikabeles oriach lo'arkoi shloisha. Guys, we spoke about the width. We spoke about the width of a brick. Oriach is a tefach and a half. The length is 3 tefachim. These 2 koidos, as you can see here in the picture, even if you were to put them together, they would not give you the width of a tefach. But if they are laid not too apart from each other, they're laid in a way that if you put the brick in a perpendicular position, if the width of the brick is going on the length of the koidos, and from the outer edge to the outer edge, from outer edge to outer edge, you have 3 tefachim, That's also considered a good koida. It's big, it's a heked. You look up, you see a ganze maisa up there. However, but the imlav, if they were placed in a way that from outer edge to the other outer edge, you have more than the three, and therefore, if you were to put the brick in that position, it would fall through it. It wouldn't be strongly placed on top of it. So then, guys, no, I take that back. I jumped ahead of myself. No, I'm saying good. I'm learning Rashbag. I just skipped the line. This is what we're learning here in the picture. Shitas Rashbag. That im mekabel serich la'arka shloisha, then ein tzarich lavi koyr acheres. The im lav tzarich lavi koyr acheres. Very good. Now, okay, guys, we're clear. In other words, even though they don't amount to a tefach, if they are placed outer edge to outer edge, 3 tefachim, you're good. Now, what's going to happen? It's hard to see in this picture, but you have these two koidas, right? Tanakama, Rashbag, had they have been placed on the same height alignment, it would have been good enough for a koida. But the problem is that one is higher and one is lower. So de facto, like when we learned Rashbag, you can't put a brick on top of it, it would slide off. It would slide off because they're not aligned in their heights. So weiter says the Braisa. The concept of Royin. You are allowed to apply review as if the one on top is aligned on height-wise with the one on the bottom. Likewise, you are allowed to look at the esatachtoinom ki'ilu hilamayla. And then, again, if they are meet the criterions of either the Tanakama or the Rashbag, then you're good to go. However, remember the following. The moment we speak about heights, we learned in the first Mishnah, not Rabbi Yehuda, but the Tanakama, that there is a maximum height. That if you have a halal more than 20 amas, it's not a good, you don't have, even though you have a koid, it's not good. We also learned in the Gemara that if the koid is placed, you don't have a minimum of 10 tfachim, it's also not good. So says Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Bulbad, Shaloi Kehei El Yoyin L'mayla Michaf. And likewise, V'tachtoina should not be Lamata Masara. Even though you say Royin, Royin doesn't resolve this issue. If it's Lamayla Me'esrim, we don't say Royin Ki'ilu, it's under. You don't do that. And therefore, now that Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda said that, Amar Rabbi, he just made the following observation. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, he holds like his father in our Mishnah, B'chada, Upali Allah B'chada. Rabbi Yehuda, how was that? Right, Rabbi Yehuda was the one in our Mishnah that should give Alamid Beis that holds that doesn't have to be actually strong enough, even if it's made out of kash. Royin oisa, it's made out of metal, so he subscribes to Royin. Royin as if the top one goes down. But Upali Galal B'chada, the Ilah Rabbi Yehuda holds Lamayla Me'esrim is good. You don't even have to there's no problem if a koid is Lamayla Me'esrim. But clearly, Rabbi Yehuda Savar that B'toy Chafin Lamayla Michav is loy. So that's just a fact, not a problem. Not every time does the son have to follow the shita in halacha like his father.
Rabbi, so if these two pairs are 8 amas apart from each other, it's still good according to Rabbi Yosef and Yehuda?
Oh, very good. So what Gabriel is saying is that when it came to the width, right, these two kaidas were wide enough, machlekes Tanakama and Ashbag, but if they're too wide apart, we don't bring them together. When it comes to an issue of height, then as long as, look at what he's saying, if the top one is mamish, is 20 amas high up there, but it's 20 amas, not more, and the bottom one is 10 tvachim, then yes, we say Royin. You see, B'chlal, Gabriel, that when it comes to bringing things together, right, lavud. So whether lavud is less than 3 or less than 4, it's very limited. When it comes to the concept of good achis and good asik, and we're going to learn in Sukkah the concept of chavid v'rami. Chavid v'rami is on something that's a whole roof, wider. Good is on a wall, or anything less than a tefach. Here, a roof or oil is a tefach or more. The whole thing goes up and down. Allah it goes up and down. Yes, it's like a good point. It's easier to move up and down than side by side when it comes to these halachas. Let's move on. Says the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda holds rechava afal pisha eina b'riyah. He's lenient. Has to be wide a tefach. It doesn't have to actually be strong enough to support. Says the Gemara that you should know Nachamol. We have some DAF Yud Aleph that the Rav, the great Rav, hired Rav Yehuda to teach his son Chia. The dynamic. Sometimes a father can be the best teacher to a son. Sometimes you have to hire a teacher. A teacher would be more matzliach. Elamah, Rav was a tough father. He would watch the class. So and then he would correct the teacher. He was the big Rav. Masni lei Rav Yehuda lechia barav kamei Rav. When the teacher of his son, when Rav Yehuda was teaching Chia, he was teaching him this Mishnah, and he read the Mishnah the way we have it in our Girsa. That Rabbi Yehuda is lenient. He holds that the rechava, as long as the koida has a width of a tefach, even though it's not physically strong enough to hold the oriach, it's good. So right away, Rav says, no, you got the wrong girsa. Amalei, asniyeh. Read the Mishnah, right, the first medium line, the rechava ubiriyah. Rabbi Yehuda is repeating the sheet of the Tanakh. Everyone holds that it has to actually be strong enough, and therefore, my friends, according to Rav's version, the whole line that if it was made out of kash or made out of konim, royin oisaki ilu hishamataches, Rav did not have any of that. In the name of Rav, clearly that rechava arba'a, that if the koira is 4 tfachim wide, afal pisha eina b'riyah, it's good. So the Gemara says actually it fits. Yeah. If it is only 1 tefach, or any amount up until 4 tefachim, there isn't even a machloikis. It has to be strong. Chiddush of Rav is that if it's mamish 4 tefachim, now and only now, now it doesn't have to be strong. So if it's 4 tefachim wine and it's made out of straw can never hold a brick. Only then is it good. Now we are now not focusing on the girsa of Rav. We're going back to our Mishnah. There is a machlokes according to our version. Asks the Gemara, once Rabbi Yehuda says that it doesn't have to be b'riyah, why do we need to have the next statement? If it was made out of kash, who needs that? Yeah, we said it's good enough. So the Gemara says, nah, there's a big chiddush here. Michael Mashmalan answers the Gemara, he says it doesn't have to be strong. So the Gemara says, I might have thought that when does Rabbi Yehuda say it doesn't have to be strong? If it's made out of wood, if it's made out of a material that if this material would have been just a little bit more of it, it would have been able to hold on to the ariyach. Bemina aminina. So again, you have a koida. The koida is with a tefach, but it's not strong enough. Rabbi Yehuda says it's good enough because if this material would have been doubled or tripled, then it can hold on to a ariyach. But what happens if you use a material which is kash? No matter how much kash you put, kash can never hold an ariyach. Maybe we don't say royin, but shaloi b'mina, then maybe lo yamrinan kamash malan. Even if it's made out of a material that no matter how much of it you put, it's never strong. Rabbi Yehuda holds as long as it is a tefach wide, we view it as if it's made out of metal. Akuma, the next case in the Mishnah, again the Mishnah says royin oisaki li pshuta. We just learned the din of royin. The din of royin is even if it's not strong, we say royin. So if it's akumad, if it's bent, of course we make believe as if it's straight. So the Gemara says, no. There's a big novelty here, and just to have the image of akuma, here you have the image of akuma. So if you can see a little bit better, you're going to notice the following: that the koida is placed by the edge of the mavui, but the akuma part goes over the Reshus Harabim, and that's going to be the whole chiddush that we're going to have here in the Gemara. That kedar Rav Zayda, the first widest line in the Gemara. If you have this koida that's akuma, it's bending over the Reshus Harabim, but the area that's bent is not over. Is still over the mavui. If everything is over the mavui, it's good. What happens if instead of you having the bent part going further, right? What happens if the koida was flipped on the side in the picture? and the bent part is going up. Likewise, if the bent part is going over the Rishus Harabim, or if the Koren is in 20, but you have the bent part going up and it's going above 20, or the opposite, the Koren is placed above 20, but the bent part, the stomach, is going under. She is above 10 tfachim, right? With the hay at the bottom is tfachim. So here there's a chiddush. It's not just royin as if the koira is straight. Some of the koira is where it doesn't belong. So the chiddush is we say royin to a limit. Royin kol she'ilu yinot lakim imusa. Make believe what discount it. Make believe it's not there. And now what? If it's not there, you're missing a piece. But we just learned above, if you're missing a piece, but it's less than 3 tfachim, lavud. The ein being zel zeh shloisha, then ein sarach lavi koira cheres. But ve'im lav. But if you make iroyin, you take away the bent part. But between one piece and the other, now you have a gap of 3 or more, then yes, sarach lavi koira cheres. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that when you have a koira akuma, even though it's over the Rishus Harabim, it's good as long as you can use lavud to straighten it out. The Gemara says, well, really, you're just telling me again another application of lavud. I can argue pshita. We already know lavud. Hanami pshita. Answers the Gemara, no, it's not pshita. You know which case is not pshita? Like in the picture before. The bent part is going over the Rishus Harabim. Yes, if you take it out, you have lavut. But you know what? You would think that there's a problem here. It's the chalei. Let's go that koira is mishum heker. And as we mentioned a few times, even according to the one that says koira mishum mechitza, there is a heker aspect to it. So people remember, if I'm in the mavui, I can only carry up until the koira. If some of the koira is protruding, someone mistakenly can look up, can see they're still under the koira and carry there, but they are already in the Rishus Harabim. So you would have thought that you can apply lavud because a person will mistakenly carry in the Rishus Harabim. So that's the chiddush that we don't have that fear. Why don't we have that fear? Because Taka, if you take out that piece and you're less than 3 tfachim, so people are going to realize that. No, less than 3 tfachim is a very small amount of space. There is enough of a heker to make sure that you won't carry into the Rishus Harabim. Then the final line in the Mishnah is that if the koira was completely circular, agula, we're not changing the rule, the halachic rule of a tefach. We're saying that royin, so first of all, the fact that physically you can't put a oriach, I don't care. The oriach will fall off because it's round. Royin, we view it as if it's flattened, as if it's planed out. But ki'ilu yimirobas, it's as if it's flat. But hold on, but what's the diameter? So the Mishnah gave you the diameter, yimirobas. Hasul amali, why do we have to give another example? Royin, we already said the royin. So the Gemara says, no, seifi yitzrichalei. To tell you the rule, that kol sheyesh be'kefa gimel tfachim, yesh by rachav tefach. Halachically, there was a rachav tefach, to which the Gemara asks, Binon Amili, as we explained. Binon Amili, on a physical phenomena, you don't need a Binon Amili, even though sometimes we have that also. But here, physically, you need 3.14, and you have to have a kon of a tefach. Here, the Mishnah is saying that if the circumference is only 3, we apply pi. That's a chiddush, because we're really physically going to end up with the diameter of less than a tefach. Halachically, we can say 3-1. Where do we know that from? So Amar Rabbi Yechanan Amar Kra, and as we mentioned in the introduction, that Shlomo HaMelech built what is known as Yam Sha'asa Shlomo, beautiful big basin that was resting on 12 oxen, that was somewhere in the Azara in the first Beis HaMikdash. And the pasuk reads like this: that Bayas as Hayam Mutzak, that Shlomo HaMelech made the pool of Mutzak, of cast metal. And what are the dimensions? If you were to measure it in its diameter, right, from one side to the other, the width was 10 amas. And Agul Saviv, it was actually not a box, it was circular. How tall was it? It was 5 amas tall. And now comes the key line, right? This is it. This is the punchline that the kaf shloishim ba'ama yasuv oisli saviv. If you were to measure the circumference, you would come to 30 amas circumference. So 30 amas circumference, 10 amas diameter, 3 to 1. The pasuk approximates. If the pasuk approximates, then we could halachically approximate as well. I asks the Gemara, this is based on the Havamina, that when they measured the diameter, it was from the inner part of the rim. The inner part of the rim. When they this is the Havamina. When they measured the circle, they measured it in the outer part of the rim. So it's not exactly 3 to 1. The ha'ika safasa, you have to now add the width of the rim. So I'm gonna papa that the width of the rim of Yam Sha'asa Shleima was very skinny. Was sfas perach shoishin, was as skinny as a petal of a lily flower. Ksivbe, as the Torah clearly says that it was taka very skinny, as it says va'avi of tefach, the wall was not that thin; it wouldn't be able to hold that amount of water. The wall b'chlal was a tefach, but when you come to the rim, usfasa, it says clearly kamaise kois perach shoishan. It was mamish that skinny, like when you make a cup out of a metal, but it is as thin as a lily flower. And now we have a shiur of water, alpayim bas yachel. It was able to carry 2,000 bas. Hold on to this. We're going to need this on Amud Beis. So now we said, okay, so the width of the rim was skinny, but still, epis, it takes up space. Ve'ha'ika mashu. It's not exactly 3 to 1, based on the Havamina, that when they measured the circumference, they were measuring it from the outer. So the Gemara says, no, just like the diameter was inside the rim, kiko chashiv, the circumference was also migavoy from the inside kochashiv, and therefore 10 in diameter, 30 in circumference. The Torah is approximating 30 to 1, 3 to 1 ratio. Tanya, Rabbi says, you should know the last line of the Amid that Yom Sha'asa Shleimo Hayamachzik Mea B'Chamishim Mikvah Tahara. It contained enough water that if you were to divide it, you were able to make 150 mikvahs. Now we're going to do some Talmudic math. We got the dimensions, right? It was circular. It was 10 amas in diameter. It was 5 amas tall. Let's go see how much water this contains. And we're going to see that l'chora, it was able to contain more water than only 150 mikvahs. And here comes the kash. Michti, behold, mikvah, kamaha. What's the minimum amount of water you need in a mikvah? 40 sa. Kiddatanya, guys, we just had this above, based on a pasuk in Mitzayda, and we have to amend the gears at the end of the Amid. The pasuk actually writes, V'rachatz b'mayim es kol b'sarai, end of quote. Turning to Daf Yud Daled Amid Beis. So from the words b'mayim, Chazal tell us b'mei mikvah, meaning as Rashi says, mashma mayim mechubaram yachtov. From the words in the pasuk kol b'sarai, we learn mayim shekol gufay oil bahem. And how much water is enough water that an average person will completely be able to submerge under uvekamain. So Chazal said that's amma al amma birum shalish amas. It's gavaldi. Now this is going to be very helpful. We know that that's 40 sa, but here we're speaking about 3 cubic amas, because we're going to use the cubic amas of the Yam Sha'asa Shleima. The Shi'ar Chachamim, 1 by 1 diameter, 1 width, 1 length, tall, 3, that is 40 sa. Okay, so now based on the concept that when you have 3 cubic amas, 3 cubic amas is good for 1 mikvah. Now, Frek the Gemara, how can you, Rabbi, right? Tanya Rabbi say that the Yam Sha'asa Shleima contained 150? No, it's nicht. Chomesh Meya Garmidei, we have 500, right? 500 cubic amas, which was the size of the 5 amas tall, and 10 amas. That's 500 cubic amas. Okay, let's go. Litlas Meya. 300 cubic amas, it's a simple math. It's good for 100 mikvahs, right? For every mikvah, you need 3 cubic amas. So 100 cubic amas is good for 100. How much is half of that? How much is half of 300 cubics? 150. A total of 450. So now, so now that you know that 300 gives you 100 mikvahs. So 150 gives you 50 mikvahs, right? In other words, in order for you to have water that it could be used for 150 mikvahs, you don't need to have 500 cubic amas. You only need to have 450. So ba'ava me'ava chamshin sagya. So that's like kasha. And the mikvah Yam Shasal Shlema had 500 cubic amas. You have an extra 50 cubic amas. Now I'm just saying, das balabatim, you can answer that maybe the water was not all the way until the top. And maybe he was saying that even with the physical amount of water in the mikvah, that can be divided into 150 mikvahs. The Gemara is not going there. The Gemara is going to tell you the right cheshbon. Answers the Gemara. Now the question will really be the answer will be part of a new question. You're right. If the Yam Sha'asa Shlema would have been square, 10 by 10 by 5, 10 by 10 by 5 is 500 cubic amas. 500 cubic amas contains more than 150 mikvahs. But since Yam Sha'asa Shlema was a circle, and guys, we're putting the circle in the square, less circle in the square, because it has to be that way. Because when you're speaking about 10 by 10, the 10 by 10 that you're measuring the circle is from the widest part of the circle. Now, when you put a circle in the square, right, it contains less than 500 cubits. And that's why Taka over there, that only contained, all of it contained mayim for 150 kosher mikvahs. Yam sh'asa shlema agol haya. But now the Gemara says, ooh, I got a problem. Indeed, let's make the math, and you'll see that this is not large enough, not even for 150. As we'll make the cheshbon, it's only good enough for 125. How much is the square more than the circle? Revia of fourth. Guys, a rule, B'chlal Chazal, there's milagav and milabada, which means like this, that if you were to look just at the circle in the picture, just look at a circle. If you were to add a third of a circle, a third of it, add to it, you would come to the same area of the square. So we would call it adding a third. That's called a third milagav. Once you added the third, now you have 4 thirds. The circle has 3 thirds plus your added one. So the added one is called a fourth. So now that we began with the number of 500, we now have to subtract, right, this fourth. Let's see where we're going to get to. And the way we do it is very simple. And if it would have been a square, it would have been 500 cubits. And what we're going to do is that we're going to divide the 500 into 400 and 100, just to simplify the math. So if you have the number, if the square would have been just 400 and you want to take off a fourth, so how much would you get to? How much would that be? Plus it, 400, take off a fourth, how much do you have? 300 cubics. 300 cubic amas, we've already learned. If one mikvah is 1 by 1 by 3, if one mikvah is 3 cubic amas, 300 cubic amas will amount to the amount of meya, 100 mikvahs. But that's only if you would have had 400. The truth is you had 500. So now let's cheshbon the other 100. Lemeya, if you deduct a quarter of 100, how much do you have? Instead of having 100 cubits, you have 75 cubits. Okay, good. How many mikvahs can 75 cubits of water make? If each one is 3, so if you have 75, you have 25. 25 times 3, 75 is Esrim B'chamisha. So now that we made that cheshbon, you deducted, you took off the fourth milabad. So now this circle is Hani Me'eva Esrim B'chamisha Havalu, and not the 150. Now it's too little. First white line. Answers the Gemara. It must be. Rami Bari Cheskel, he actually learned in a Braisa. Yes, it was circular in the top. In the bottom, it was square, which means in the bottom of this Yam Sha'asa Shlema, there was more water. Yam Sha'asa Shlema, Shalosh Amas Tachtoinis. It was tall, 5 amas. 3 of the bottom ones were mirubas. It was only the second line, the second white line, the Shtaim Elyonis were agulais. And now, if you'll make the cheshbon, which the Gemara is not making, it's going to be exactly 150. Now the Gemara adds, now that we know that it was partially square, partially circle, which part was square, which part was circle, that's clear. We know that from the pasuk that we mentioned on Amud Aleph, that when they measured the top, it was a circle. So the top wasn't square and the bottom a circle, because it says in the pasuk, this fasoi, that the rim agoil ksif. But Ella asks the Gemara, Ema Chada. Maybe, oh, beautiful picture. That's Rabbi Steinsaltz, exactly. Maybe only the top amma was circular. Maybe the square, which is more, you see the corners protrude, maybe that wasn't 3 amas tall, maybe that was 4 amas tall. So weiter, there is more water in there. So the Gemara says, Loisal Kadaitach. You know how Rabbi Chia knew that it was 150 mikvahs? We quoted the pasuk in Amud Aleph because it says Alpayim bas yachal, that the mikvah contained 2,000 bas of liquid. Now, how much is a bas? Bas kamahava, a bas is 3 son. How do I know that? Based on a pasuk in Yecheskel, where it says that ma'aser habas minakor, that a bas is a tenth, is meiser, a quart is 30 sa, which means a bas is 3 sa. So if you have 2,000 bas, the havalu shita alfe gevide, which comes out it's 3,000 measures. 3,000 measures is, 6,000 measures is exactly 150 mikvahs. So based on this alpayim, that it's machzik, alpayim bas yachil, that's how we know that the height of the square was 3 amas. Only the top 2, the full top 2 was circular, and that's exactly enough water to fill up 150 mikvahs. It says another pasuk clearly that it was machzik batim shloisha salafim, not alpayim bas, but here it says 3,000 oigavalt. That the Shyam Sha'asa Shlema was a container that can hold 3,000 bas. That's a lot more. So the Gemara says, yeah, that means that if you would have put solids into the Yam Sha'asa Shlema, then since solids can be heaped over the walls of the container, unlike water will spill out, but solids you can make a gedusha, you can make an heap. And there is a rule that whenever you heap something in a container, how much more can you add to that keli? A third millabad, always by Chazal it's millabad. So very good. So 2,000 to 3,000, right, is called a third millabad. It's 50% millagav, but add 50%, and now you have another third. Amanabayish mamina haigucha tulasa hava. It's not nami. We learned the same rule. We can extrapolate the same rule from the following Mishnah. The Mishnah is about Hilchos Tumah V'Tara, that when you have a movable keli, if it's not a keli that could be moved when it's full and empty, many kelim, when it's empty, you can move it. But it's so large that if you fill it up, it's too heavy for it to be moved. So it's not similar to any item that's mentioned in the pasuk in Shmini, and it's b'chlal not makabel tuma. So therefore, the Mishnah says a shida, a teva, a migdal, a kaveres akash. Even if you have a straw basket, the basket itself is very light, but if it's very large, you can't schlep it when it's full. Or kaveres akanim, or a reed basket, or the boy Sfina Alexandrias. There were certain ships that had in it a very large container in which they put drinking water, so they should be able to drink on a long voyage. Even though these kelim have a shulayim, they have a floor, so it's a halachic keli, but it's very large. So says the Mishnah that if they are machzikos, 40 sa'ah if it's a liquid, which means 60, 2 cord, we said 1 quart is 30 sa'ah, 2 quart is 60 sa'ah. Biyavesh, here you clearly see the ratio. Here you're adding a third millabad. Since it's that large and you can't transport it both full and empty, it remains something that's never susceptible to becoming tamei and therefore to hidden. Just to make a couple of very interesting concepts, the concept of round and the concept of square, and how if you can just put the picture back up, Daniel Hassan, from Rabbi Steinsaltz, from Rabbi Evan Yisrael of blessed memory, that circular represents something infinite, and the square represents the ultimate concept of finite, and that's the whole Beis Hamikdash. And water represents also Alma Discasio, that was put in it. In other words, the Beis Hamikdash was a square, it was a limited home, and in it is contained the infinite God Almighty, which is a moedic thing, which that can make sense that they made the Yam itself, the bottom was square and the top was circular. How great is that? Okay, let's move on to the next Mishnah. So as we had here the Mishnah of a koira with the R, minimum sizes for the koida, says our Mishnah. Lechoyayin shamru. They also have a measurement. Less than it, it's not kosher. Gevayin asara tfachim. It has to have 10 tfachim. But rechavam va'oidyon kosher. But they don't have to have a minimum width or minimum depth. They just have to have a minimum height. Rabbi Yossi argues, and he holds, not only does it have a minimum, like a koida notes, like a koida times 3, it has to have a roichav of 3 tvachim. The Gemara focuses on the first word of the Mishnah, lichoyayin. If you remember, right, not last Mishnah, but 2 Mishnayos ago, and DAF Yud Aleph on the base, Hechsher Mavui, the Shami says lechi v'koida. Basil says lechi oy koida. Rabbi Eliezer says lichoyayin. It sounds like he's continuing Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. Why would we do that? Lema, that Tanan Stama Rabbi Eliezer, and that L'chura would be that the Rabbeinu HaKadosh is paskening like Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar L'choyayin Bo'inon answers the Gemara, no, that Loi, my L'choyayin, he's speaking about generally, that when you have mavois, muva'ois, that have L'choyayin in the plural, that, but every mavoi only needs 1 lechi. Asks the Gemara, well, look at the last Mishnah. The last Mishnah, Daf Yud, Gimel Amid Beis, the one that we began today. HaKoira sha'amru. Also write koira in plural. Why write it in the singular? The Gemara, koira, nami. The Mishnah should have said koirais, referring to muva'ois. My koirais the alma. And says the Gemara, hachi ka'amar. Hachi ka'amar. Oisam, by koira there was no machloikas. And this fits especially like the gears of Rav, everyone agreed. And by the way, by the tefach, everyone agrees it has to have a tefach width. There's no one debating that. According to our version, there is a debate whether it has to be strong enough. But by koida, it has to have a width. You should know that Gavoyan Asara Tfachim, even though by Lechoyayin there was a machlokes. There was a machlokes. Koida is 1. By Lechoyayin, we talk out of machlokes whether you have to have 1 or 2. They both agree. They don't argue that it has to be 10 tefachim tall, and they both agree on that, and they both agree that there's no minimum to the width. In other words, even though there is a machlokes in some areas, when it comes to this, there is no argument before you come to Rabbi Yossi, because even though it's even Rabbi Eliezer, that's the word, that holds lechoyayin, which is his machmer, but he's still meko, that it doesn't have to have a minimum depth. Now, v'kama kol shehu, this is a very important liner. You should know that sometimes Chazal use the words kol shehu, and kol shehu doesn't mean kol shehu. We're going to have this later in the Masech. Is there mamish as skinny as you want? So the Gemara says, yeah. A lechi, according to the Shitas in our Mishnah, including Rabbi Eliezer, it can be as skinny as it is, as long as it is affixed on one of the walls entering the mavoi. As skinny as the string of a cloak. We learned that also lechi, lachatzi mavoi. What happens if you didn't put the lechi in the opening of the mavoi, which is where it touches with the Rishus Harabim? You put it in halfway in. So says the Braisa, ein loy elachatzi mavoi. You can only use the area that's further in from the lechi. Pshita, of course, you can't use the front. Gemara says no. The chiddush is that at least that half you could use. Which is being medayik. The chiddush, the front, of course, you can't use, but you could use the middle half. So the Gemara says no, that's not pshita, because mal the tema lechush dilma asil ishtamusha b'kulei. Kamash Malan, mamish, like we learned with the koida, that's akuma. No, people will see it, they'll know not to go further. Amar Rava, asa lechi l'mavui. If you made a lechi, v'igviyam an akarka shloisha, and you lifted it up the ground 3. Guys, this is even according to the Rashbag. Oisher fligim an akoisel shloisha. Or if you distance it, it's not like we said, it's not touching the wall. There is a space in which a gedi can go in between. And afilu l'Rashbag the aman amanin lavud, as long as it is under 4, therefore loy ka'amar. Let's have another few lines. Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah says that l'chayayin have to have the width of 3 tvachim. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi in the din of Himlei, guys, Shabbos Daf Kuf Ches, we're not allowed to make brine. Making brine, midrabanan, is similar to be ma'abed oirois, because they would make brine by putting salt, and salt was used when you're tanning leather. Then the Mishnah says you can make a little bit of a brine to put on your food. Rabbi Yossi says you can't make any brine. He's machmer by hilmei. He's machmer by lechem. So we have one version that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that ain't halacha, not like Himlei. We are lenient. You can make a little bit of brine to put on your salad on Shabbos. And we don't say that it has to have a minimum of 3 tvachim. Amar lei Rav Huna bar Chinana to Rabbi Yosef. You, Rabbi Yosef, as we keep on repeating, he became ill. And during his illness, he forgot some of his learning. So the statement that we had right now, Amar Rabbi Yosef, was after his illness. So his student tells him, I remember before you were ill that you Taka told us, Behilmi Amaratlan, that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi. But before you became ill, before you forgot your learning, the Lochayayin, you never told us that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi. In other words, maybe you're forgetting. You're quoting Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Maybe it's nisht. So Rabbi Yosef responded, even if I never said it before, still Maishna. Maishna Behilmi. Why don't we paskin like Rabbi Yossi Behilmi? Because of a klal. Because the pligi rabbanan alei das rabim b'yachid v'rabim. So that same reason goes over here. L'choyayin nami, since pligi rabbanan alei, that's why it makes sense that hal ein halacha ki Rabbi Yossi. So amalei, no. Shani l'choyayin, no. I'll tell you why we should paskin like Rabbi Yossi. And we had that before in Daf Yud Beis. Since the Rebbe holds like him, we had that before, that the Rebbe holds that every lechi has to have 3 tvachim. So it's not Rabbi Yossi against everyone. Maybe here we do paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Another version, Rabbi Rechumi had the following discussion, learned like this. That Omar Rabbi Yehuda Berei Rav Shmuel Bar Shelas, in the name of Rav, Ein halacha ki Rabbi Yossi, loy behilmi v'loy b'lechayayin. So people asked, so they asked him, Amrulei. Amrat, yes, Azoyis to gesagt. So right now, Amar Lahu, so this is the version that now, Eloi, no, I take it back. Loi means I never said it, means I don't agree with this anymore. I Amar Ravahu Elikim, you did tell us before. Not only did you tell us originally in the name of Rav that we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi, not by Hilmi, not by L'chayayin, and v'gamirna lamine, it became part of our Otayra Shabal Peh. We already incorporated, we know that this is what you said. In other words, when you're saying loy, you're not saying that you never said it. You're saying that now you changed your mind. Why did you change your mind? Yachid v'rabim, halacha kerabim, u'may kamak because of the klal that Mishum, the Rabbi Yossi, Nemukei imoi. Since Rabbi Yossi always explained the reasons for his shitas, Rabbi Yossi, he made so much sense that even though he's a yachid against the rabbim, we do paskin like Rabbi Yossi, and now Taki, he changed his mind, and we paskin like Rabbi Yossi in both cases. So now we don't know, by l'chayayim, what do we do? What should we do? When we make a lechi, do we have to say like Rabbi Yossi or not? Maybe Rabbi Yossi imay, maybe we have to make a lechi that's wide 3 tvachim. So Amalei, you know what? Go see what people do. If people make a lechi that has the minimum width, that's what you got to do. If people ended up accepting kedas chachamim, that mashu, kolshu, then you're good. And Masni, this concept of puk, go out and see what people do. On another din, we had on brachas. What bracha do you make before you drink water? We learned in Machlokas Tanoim. If you drink water just because something is stuck in your throat, then you don't make a bracha at all. The water doesn't give you hana'ah, and you're not drinking it because you're thirsty. If you're thirsty, you got to make a bracha. What bracha do you make? The Tanach says, the Tanach says, you make before you drink water. So here, what do we do? So on this, he said, go see what people make. And we know that people make the bracha of shahakol before and B'ayda Nefashis after. Go see what people do. The hashgacha prat is that we get it right. The yidden, we intuit because of the bittul, the ratzon of the Eibishter, And whenever our Chachamim did not come with a definite halacha, then seeing what people do is a way to determine what the halacha is to be continued. We're late. Good.
Thank you, Rabbi.